committees require public notice, and the Open Meetings Act applies, regardless of the amount of council members that would be on that committee.
Okay.
And the definition of committee is pretty broad, where any subgroup or any group of this council that meets, pretty much qualifies as a committee under the Open Meetings Act.
But then it does have to be a regularly scheduled meeting?
It would not have to be regularly scheduled. I think that would be preferential just due to every time you would schedule it. If it was not regularly scheduled, the clerk would have to then provide notice. It does not have to be regularly scheduled. But I also kind of thought that that was some of the intent of this, was to have regularly scheduled task force meetings. Doesn't mean that the task force could not abandon after 6 months, a year, whatever. But I think the idea would be is, whenever that period would be, July 1st, January 1st, we would just pass our new amended ordinance that would detail these are the task force for 2022, and this is when they're going to meet.
Just trying to keep away from having to change the ordinance every time. There might be a new task force that comes up for a new goal of some sort. Is there a way that maybe we could say the task forces are kept on record at the clerk's office and are available upon request?
Well, we got to provide notice. So I think the ordinance provides that notice.
Let's still talk about notice.
We can certainly, we don't have to amend the ordinance each time. But I think we could speak broadly in the ordinance. But again, if we don't have a regularly scheduled task force and it's not necessary, then it would just require, notice by the clerk each time that the meeting is. And there's nothing saying either. There might be certain task force that do have more regular schedule, right? And that doesn't mean it doesn't prevent you from creating a task force, let's say in July. You just then would have to go through the notice requirements. That ordinance itself would not provide the notice. I'm not sure how council envisions this. I guess I kind of envisioned it that these task forces would have the same level of formality that, like, this caucus meeting itself has. I think that, that's how I interpreted this. That doesn't mean that's the will of council.
Yeah, I think our intention was more just to have a more formalized, but more regimented, so that we have, consistent minutes. They're provided in a packet. There's complete transparency even with unapproved minutes. And let's say Small Business Task Force meets 4 days a year, 4 days a year. Would you, and we pick those days 6 months in advance. Are we talking about putting those in an ordinance and saying for each one of them?
If we want to rely on the ordinances providing notice, yes. But if you don't want that level of specificity, that's fine. We can do it kind of as we're doing it, where we can create the task forces in the ordinance. We can create these changes as a part of our meetings ordinance, and then you just have the flexibility of calling them kind of when you want to call them. My hesitation on that would be then they do become more like special meetings. I think these are blurred lines, right? So I think there's always the spirit that you want to have informal meetings to work things out. But the problem is in a government setting like this, it triggers the Open Meetings Act. And there's nothing about the Open Meetings Act that really is informal. So I think these, whether you call them task force or committee meetings or caucus meetings or whatever, I think it's still going to trigger the same formality of the Open Meetings Act. So I think the question this council has is, do you want to just go ahead and put that in an ordinance format and have the regularly scheduled times of your task forces? Or theoretically we could put the shell of the concept as an ordinance, and then we could each year just pass a municipal order that modifies the task forces, times and dates. There's ways we can skin it, but I wouldn't worry too much about the first and second reading issue. I think really what council needs to be more concerned with is what level of formality do you want these task forces? Do you want to have it where it's, 4 meetings a year and it's going to be every Tuesday at 4 o'clock in the small council chamber, whatever it is?
I think that kind of gets away from the intent of it, because there's some things, like the summer send-off task force that was meeting every week for, a period just before the event. There's things like that. So one other thing that made me think about, that Mr. Meyer triggered in my head here, was that if it's a special meeting, then we can only talk about the stuff that's on the agenda, and we can't talk about anything else, which kind of derides the whole point of having a task force where we brainstorm and think about, new and different things.
So, are we better off going back to, I'll say, the older committee structure, where there's, 3, 4, maybe it's not 6, committees, and then as we have got something to talk about, that group, we're talking about it at that point. So I think
I don't want to stymie what council wants to do. My thought would be I think council needs to be on the same page with how they want to handle this, and then we can work through the logistics of how to make that happen.
I like the idea of, being very agile with, flowing to that work, if we need to meet, weekly for 6 weeks, and we've only had, 2 official meetings scheduled, is that really buying us much by putting that in a very rigid structure? I just want to make sure if we're gonna do this, there's got to be significant upside versus passing some of the procedural. Yes, if there is a task force or a committee that you're gonna handle minutes in this way, and so that part becomes transparent, but the rest of the work can just flow as needed.
We've been doing the task force meetings correctly, legally so far, haven't we?
Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with how we've done it.
Okay.
Mrs. Kyle?
I was going to say, I agree with Mr. Hermes, because I can envision different committees requiring different times of meetings. Like when we had the Blight Committee, we met once a month. That's all we needed. But as he said, when you did the summer send-off, you pretty well, especially towards the end, you better be meeting every week, because that would be important to that whole thing flowing correctly. So I can just see that different committees are going to require different kind. We can't just put them all in a set pattern and say this is what you have to do. I think it depends on what committee you've got, and then some things arise later on that you might want to have more frequent meetings. So I just see a problem with that. And then you've got that ordinance, and you got to keep changing it back and forth.
Well, we certainly can create an ordinance which creates these concepts and creates the formality of how you want to handle the task forces. And then we can just say these task forces are going to be created by either the mayor or council or whoever you want to have create these task forces. They just have to follow that level of formality. I think in a perfect world, your agenda that you list for the task force, that you should kind of treat these as special meetings. But the practical side is there's no formal action taken at these meetings. So I just don't think that we're really running that much risk if we stray off of the agenda. But I think if you make your agendas broad enough, right? I think it's one of those that I'm not that worried about the technical issues, because again, there's no formal action being taken in any of these task forces. Everything ultimately becomes ratified by this council as a whole. I just think you got to keep within the spirit of the Open Meetings Act by providing that notice, being in the public, doing it here in the council chambers or in the small council chambers. At the end of the day, if you're going to get popped on one of these, you want to make as good argument as possible that we've done everything we can to comply with the Open Meetings Act here. We're not hiding anything from anybody.
Any other questions?
So I have a question. Do you want me to pretty much take this PowerPoint and turn it into an ordinance for first reading for our next meeting, or for an ordinance that we discuss at another caucus meeting?
I'd rather see something that was written up and we can actually talk
Okay.
about in advance of that first reading.
So you want me to take this PowerPoint, turn it into a proposed ordinance, and then we discuss it at what point?
Just whatever our next caucus meeting is, unless we've got something that would push us to do it before that.
Okay, does anyone else have any thoughts or opinions on that?
I feel like right now there's quite a bit of ambiguity around what's going to be in here, and to see it for the first time,
Okay.
at the February
Then-
meeting.
I will take this, and we will, I will have a proposed ordinance ready for next meeting, and then council can decide how they want to handle that. So we'll circulate it prior to the next regular meeting, and if there's the will of council to discuss it at the next caucus meeting, then that can be dealt with at the next regular meeting. Does that work? All right.
Okay, next on the agenda is the current task force review and 2020 creations. So I'm going to just go down my list real quick here. I think the majority of these task forces are going to continue on through the 2022 year, but correct me if I'm wrong. So city beautification, we're going to keep moving forward, and Parks Master Plan is still moving forward. Okay, race relations and diversity, okay. And then the Small Business Task Force. Okay, I had community engagement. Are we?
So I think in Vicki and I thought we had a great participation, and it was great in concept. I'd actually like to see what we did on a smaller scale done on a larger scale. And what that is more of soliciting feedback from our residents, whether it's via the newsletter, via the I don't know what it's when they send your tax bill. I don't remember what we whistle stop. Am I close? Something to that effect, because I thought that we got some very meaningful feedback from our residents, and we were able to address some issues and also hear what they thought we were doing well. Because a lot of times we don't get, council doesn't get to hear how great things are doing. I mean, all jokes aside, I had many people reach out to me and say, Erlanger cleans our streets so well, it doesn't set a good tone as to what the rest of Kenton County looks like in many days, because our roads are so great with regard to snow removal. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a task force, but I think it'd be something that, and it's not, it wouldn't strain resources to consider soliciting for that feedback and doing some sort of a survey. But I mean, do you have any comments on that, Vicki? It doesn't need to be a task force, but I thought it was great responses and engagement.
Yeah, I thought so too, and it was interesting to see that different sections of the city had different concerns. And what always amazes me is people, they'll call us or email us, and it's a problem that they could just call the city and have it taken care of, but they feel more comfortable knowing that you are going to handle it and talk to the right person. So why they need somebody to hold their hand, but we do have people that are like that. So I don't know if we could set up something where, like I don't know if you could set up a special thing on our website where they could contact us if they needed help. I don't know what the answer is, but I did like that committee. That was very interesting, and we had some really good people on there, citizens from different sections of town. And so I would like to see it continued. I just don't know, with all this stupid Corona stuff, do you think they would be willing to come out, or do they want to do Zoom?
Well, I think that's one thing that delayed, because we did reach back out, and some people wanted in person, some people wanted it virtual. We weren't permitted to do virtual anymore. Like, it was a whole, to do, but I think it'd be nice to see engagement from all corners of the city, and that was something we really sought to do, was try to reach out to people that at least we knew in those areas, and I reached out via social media. I don't know. So great in concept. I mean, I just did a Google form, and we got maybe 30 people responded. Like, it was good feedback and engagement. So yes, to probably dissolving the task force itself, but I'd like to see something to that effect, executed sometime this year. Because I mean, I found it to be valuable, and we were able to solve some problems we weren't aware of, and see some praises that we like to, what we're doing great. So,
Yeah, I'm
thank you.
just wondering if there could be something on our website where people would, but see, then the problem is you get all these people that don't use the internet, or computers. I think that's kind of going away, though, most people do, but some of the elderly people, I don't know, they're scared to death of that internet computer thing. But if we could have some way of getting some feedback that, the city could respond and address their concerns, it'd be really nice. I mean, it shows goodwill on our part. Now, I mean, like I said, it's a good committee. I don't know if you need to continue that or if we could do it, another way. So, but it's nice to get that feedback.
Okay. Maybe we could just get together and have a conversation about what type of feedback you're looking for. Maybe have 4 surveys sent out, 1 a quarter in the email newsletter that are geared around something specific, a specific topic. So maybe we can just sit down and have, a conversation about how we can incorporate that into the email newsletter. Okay.
Snow removal is number 1. That's fantastic. I have to say that. At Public Works, you do a great job, and that's unbelievable. Compared to all the other cities, I think we're the best.
All right. I think that is all of the Gary. Okay. I think that's all the existing task forces over the last year. Correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, well, you're
Well, I was
the
calling that
brand
new,
new guy.
so,
Huh?
since we just started meeting in January, I'm calling that new.
Okay. Tell us the name again, because the name is changed.
Yes, this is the fire EMS of the future. Just to be clear, I think when I first asked for it, we had called it the Reimagined Fire, due to the politics in Cincinnati and the Reimagined Police, which was a defund the police movement. I did not want to be associated with that. That was not my goal. So that's why we're calling it Fire EMS of the Future, so we can kind of focus on how do we best build for the future, not necessarily defund anything.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Oh, Tom.
Master facilities, even though we have moved, we're going to be moving Public Works. We still have to deal with the fire department and other issues and concerns.
All right, great. Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, we officially closed on the property. I'm allowed to say that, right? Okay. We officially closed on the property last Monday, so very exciting. We'll start, we already put that out to bid, right? So PCA is going to begin the design build, putting together the plan. The concept plan. Cool. All right. Any other task forces that we need to move into 2022? Okay. All right.
Is this the time for new task forces?
Yes, sir.
Oh, well, I would like to propose a new task force to explore constructing a covered farmers market structure in the city of Erlanger.
I would like to be on that task force.
I would like to join as well.
Okay, Ryan. Okay, and let's see here. Is there anybody from staff that you would need, or do you want a part of the committee or the task force, or do you want to just incorporate them as needed?
There would be some reporting and compliance component involved with potential state funding sources, so it would be nice to have someone to coordinate that.
All right. So we'll go ahead and create that task force. Fantastic. Anybody else for new projects? All right. We will move on in our agenda. The Edge Incentive Ordinance. Ms. Randall.
Thank you. Just a quick overview, the existing EDGE incentive is our larger business incentive that we offer to recruit new businesses into the city and to provide incentives for businesses that are staying and expanding within the city. Currently, the qualifiers are that the company has to have a payroll of at least $750,000, that they're not a sexually oriented business, and that the proposed business activity will increase job creation, decrease blight, increase property values, or improve a documented environmental hazard. Some of the proposed changes for this ordinance include adding flexibility in reviewing and evaluating the incentive to be provided to companies. The language would read, instead of providing an incentive of 1/3, it would be up to 1/3. So that would allow the discretion to go below that for companies where that may be appropriate. And in addition, new language would allow a larger incentive up to 2/3 of the payroll license fee for really large payroll companies that exceed $20 million in payroll on an annual basis. So again, that language would allow up to 2/3 for any company that exceeds $20 million. In evaluating the amount of incentive to be provided to each applicant business, we'll be looking at the number of jobs that business creates, the quality of the jobs in comparison to the average wage that we're seeing in the area, any potential adverse impacts to the community, such as high traffic volumes or excessive wear and tear on our roadway infrastructure, for example. And then we can also look at if we feel like that business may require additional use of police and fire services. So adding some flexibility and then establishing some criteria to use that flexibility. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you.
So you have the proposed ordinance change already. So if everybody's comfortable, we're going to add this to the agenda for the February meeting. Mr. Meyer?
I do have just a couple questions, and just trying to understand. So with this change, how often would we have anticipated over the past several years that these changes would have been utilized?
So these changes are based on my experiences since coming into the city. We did have a really large payroll company where we could have taken advantage of a larger incentive if that were available to offer to that company. There's also a change in here with regard to what we can offer for expanding companies within the community. That's also a direct result of an engagement that I had with one of our existing companies. While they met the payroll threshold, they didn't meet the capital expenditure threshold for an existing company. So that flexibility is being added so that if a company is staying and they're adding jobs, they can meet that incentive threshold instead of just capital improvements.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and add that to the council meeting for February. Okay, next on the agenda is the Commonwealth Area Incentive Ordinance. Councilwoman Reckers.
Sure. So everyone has been provided a copy of the grant that the Small Business Task Force came together and created. So it is intended to resident to office conversion zone and mixed-use zone structures that are like in the Commonwealth Business District, and then there's some areas off of, I guess, is that Erlanger Road? So it's really the only areas that are zoned these two particular zoning types. So it's an opportunity for them to do these office conversions, and it being reimbursed up to 50% of the capital expenses up to $40,000 to do that conversion. So they would no longer be permitted to be residential occupied any further through this conversion of converting from the zoning changes. So we've got it listed as being a new business or an expanding business converting a residential structure into a commercial office, so that change of use, or constructing a new commercial building in the ROC or the MU areas within the city. We've also required that the business be, of course, in good standing with the Secretary of State, the county, and us. A minimum of two full-time employees or equivalent with the business itself, not receiving any state incentives involving the city occupational license fees, and then not having received a Erlanger Small Business Grant or incentive within the current fiscal year. What that means is if somebody took advantage of one of our grant programs in the last, few fiscal years or since the fruition of the task force, grants that have been created, of course, in past, we don't want to hold that against them, just not within the same fiscal year would they be able to take advantage of this. They may qualify for one, but not both incentives within the fiscal year. The building itself must be owned by the occupying business or leased to a business operating with a minimum of a 3-year lease, and then that building not having a residential occupant at the time of the reimbursement of the grant. So it can have, obviously, a resident during that because the zoning the changes themselves just went into effect. If I'm correct with the Z21, where there is no longer the requirement for someone to actually live in one of those structures that's zoned ROC. Now, thanks to the Z21. So any other, and then we've got the list of anything that would be considered as part of that conversion, expenses that are eligible, visible exterior improvements, signage, parking lots, exterior lighting, walkways, fixing interior improvements such as removal or replacing of walls, floors, cabinets, bathrooms, break rooms, fixtures would be eligible. Furniture, kitchen equipment, and other movable equipment would not be eligible for consideration. And then on the back of this document is just the application process, just with all of our grants. So do you guys have any questions or discussion?
Yeah, I do have a couple. I guess the first one, is in the section 1, just talking about constructing a new commercial building in the ROC zone. I mean, I didn't think we could put a brand new commercial building in the ROC zone. I thought it had to actually be converted from.
No, it can be a new construction.
Okay. I thought that was the whole purpose of not zoning it commercial, so that we kept the residential look and feel, because it was truly a conversion from a residential facility into commercial, not constructing new commercial.
I believe you can do either or. You can convert the existing structure, or you can develop a new office structure.
Okay, I'll have to go back and take a look at that. So, I mean, I guess as we're, talking about giving away 20,000 taxpayer dollars, how long, I'm just trying to think about the area, just right around here. How long do we anticipate that one of these small businesses is going to recoup, those funds, back to the city in terms of additional payroll taxes, occupational license fees, those kind of things?
That would totally depend on the business and, what their payroll is and what their gross receipts
But,
are.
just a guess. Are we anticipating that we would recover the $20,000 over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
I know we used we looked at quite a few of these districts that exist down, downstate and in the community. One of them was Florence, right? And they have their whole Main Street as one of our examples. I mean, it could attract an architecture firm. I mean, a dentist office. We don't necessarily know who it will attract, but it's in an effort to encourage redevelopment of that area, or in any of the.
Oh, no, yeah, I mean, again, I'm not opposed to investment. I just want to make sure that if we are investing taxpayer dollars, that we at least have an understanding of, what we think we're getting back for that. Because I didn't think about architecture firm. I don't remember that being one of the uses in that ROC as I was looking through that today.
I believe we expanded, we weren't going to limit it to just professional office. That was our original intent, and then we looked at how limiting that could be. So we don't have that limitation, because once it's converted from the ROC or to the MU, it becomes the change in use, right?
Say that again?
Does the zoning then, the zoning would then change?
No, the zoning is, what the zoning is, it is ROC.
Will it be changing to mixed use, right?
No. No, the zone is through this corridor from Baker to Hulbert on both sides of Commonwealth is ROC. So that's what the zone will be and what it would stay unless someone applies for a zoning map amendment. On the other side of the street, Super Bowl, Strike and Spare, whatever it's called now, up through the Erlanger Road down to Riggs, that is mixed use.
Okay.
So that wouldn't necessarily
I remember looking at the
change
plat, and I didn't remember where the dividing line was. But I feel like do you have the list nearby, Emmy, that we can discuss the types of businesses that would be applicable?
Yeah, give me just a minute. Let me pull up the use table. Okay, so within MU, you're talking about the MU zone, correct? Okay. Within MU, we have animal care, breweries, building material sales, commercial printing, family child care, homes, daycares, dry cleaners, equipment sales, financial services, medical offices, office, personal services, which is a very broad category for any kind of personal services. We do have restaurants without drive-throughs are permitted, with drive-throughs are conditional, retail stores, and studios for work or teaching. So it's a fairly broad commercial district.
And that's this area directly across the street.
Yes.
I mean, when you ask about the benefit to the resident, it'd be awesome if somebody put a brewery or wanted to put a brewery here in Erlanger. I mean, it could be very enticing to bring, activities, entertainment.
Yeah, so that's, and I'm just trying to and that's what I'm trying to understand is, I guess when I think about the residential office conversion, we're not gonna have a brewery down here because that's not permitted, right?
Do you have the ROC listing, Emmy?
Yeah, so Gary, I think part of the reason that the amount is so high on these is because if you go down that corridor, in order to even convert one of these, and I think, Rebecca, this is what you were trying to hit on, when you do a conversion from the residential to the commercial, you're not just changing the zoning, but you're held to the commercial setback standards, and you're going to have to provide parking and all of that. And a lot of those lots are just too small to allow for you to get back there. And so one of the reasons I think that we did that amount was so that you could allow for somebody to now come in and make that investment to kind of move the needle to get somebody to actually want to go in there and do all that construction.
We also talked about in the event that somebody bought 2 parcels and did that conversion as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not arguing, I guess, about that the people are going to take advantage of the funds. Anytime you are giving out free money, somebody's always going to stick their hand out to take the free money. I'm just trying to make sure that I understand as I'm being asked to support this, that I believe that there's going to be more upside than just, giving out free money to, a business that's looking to do it, and when they fail in, 3 to 5 years, was it a good investment? And that's the part that I don't necessarily understand. I mean, even I think if we think about, the existing small business incentive grant, I don't think we've got enough, or at least I have never seen anything presented to council saying, here was the ROI on those investments that were made. We actually are starting to see, some other benefits, coming. I know we had that hypothesis, but I don't think we've ever proved that one way or the other. The fact that people are taking the free money, I don't think is necessarily an indication of success, because people always take that free handout.
I see your point, but I also think that the aesthetics on Dixie Highway have been, there's just been a phenomenal, it's being refreshed, and our businesses are making those investments, and we're able to be part of that when we can. And I think it's, I don't know, looking at Dixie Highway 3 years ago compared to the progress that's been made, I think that, can you put a price on that, Gary?
I don't know that I could point, you're heavily involved with it. I don't know that I could name one of them that have actually leveraged something, and there's been a notable change from my perspective, so.
A couple of comments. At the Small Business Task Force, we do regularly review a list of the businesses that are taking advantage of these grants, and I'm sure that report, I know that report's available to anybody. So, that in itself, I think, would help people see what we're getting for our money. I think, just driving down Dixie Highway, like Ms. Recker said, you're starting to see the fruits of our investment. I look at ROI too, but you're not always going to see an immediate return on investment for things like this. It takes time, and I just think that it's really hard to quantify some of these things that we're asking, and or that you're asking. One other thing I want to make just a comment about is we thought of a lot of examples of businesses like the ones that Ms. Randall read through, examples of those types of businesses that could move to Erlanger and take advantage of this. So I do feel like it's worth putting out there and seeing what we get back. And I will differ with your argument that, we offer free money and people take it. We haven't had anybody take advantage of our demolition grant yet. So unfortunately, I wish they would. I'm not dissing that grant. I think it's a great opportunity. I just don't think the right person has come along for that. But I think that goes to show you that our criteria is what it needs to be. And we're selective about who we give money to, and we're not just handing out free money. We're looking for solid candidates that are going to bring funds back to the city in a lot of different ways. There's no way to possibly know everything that these people are going to, or these businesses are going to bring back to the city. So that's just my 2 cents.
Gary, I think it's just another tool in the toolbox, to be honest, just like the demo grant. Not that necessarily it's going to, it's all going to be used, the funds are all going to be used every single fiscal year. It's just another tool in the toolbox to be able to offer as a opportunity to join us in Erlanger or stay in Erlanger.
No, I'm going to disagree a little bit. In one, I think the demo grant was one that was driven out of a problem that was believed to be there, and that was blight. And we, wanted to create something that would incentivize the removal of that, so we tested and learned. We went through the first year, nothing, right? So program has changed, okay? So now we're year 2, maybe nothing again. And so maybe it isn't the right program, but I think you see it all the time where people say that here's the investment that's going to be made through this government program. The believed economic impact of this investment is X. So for us to not even guess, I don't necessarily think that's prudent. I mean, I'm not saying that it's got to be precise. I absolutely agree that we can't, we're not expecting an immediate return, but we are expecting a positive economic impact over some period of time as a direct result of those investments. So I don't know how to calculate that. That's certainly beyond me, but.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that too, Mr. Myers. You know, I think it's pretty safe to say that on average, across the city, about a quarter of what the city brings in comes from residential taxes, and about 3/4 comes from businesses and payroll taxes. So, you know, and I'm trying to think about, like, how could we come up with like a rough idea of what you're asking for? So if we said, well, so the 2575 is one thing. Another thing that's important to remember is that business builds on business. So once there's some businesses in there, then other businesses will follow. It kind of sets the tone and starts bringing customers to the area. So it doesn't mean that every house along the way is going to apply for and get that incentive over time. But if we start it and say 4 or 5 businesses move in there because of this help, that we may get 15 or 20 businesses as a result of that. Okay, so if we said the average house right now going down through there pays $1,000 a year in taxes, and if we do a broad brush stroke and say that 75 and 25, that means that it should bring in about $4,000 as a business over the course of a year. So we could estimate that over the course of a 5-year period, we would get that $20,000 back. Would that be safe to say? I'm just making them up.
No, I was just thinking, you know, as we think, you know, even not as broad of those strokes, but if we say, hey, it's going to be a personal services business and the average across our city is X, I mean, that gives us a sense of if this type of business comes in, here's what could happen, because it is limited on the number of things that can be done going up and down this course. I mean, we've got, what, a maximum of 125 parcels that are going to apply to this, and a good portion of those are, you know, our large multifamily across the street. So there, you know, the number of opportunities are certainly limited. I'm just trying to make sure that I have an understanding of, you know, what is the impact of the investment going to be.
Any other questions? Okay.
Just for clarification too, we do have a proposed ordinance. So I think if it's the will of council, we'll have that for first reading at our next meeting.
All right. Next on the agenda is occupational license ordinance. Emmy and Jack.
Okay. All right, so this ordinance is fairly lengthy. I'm just going to hit some of the highlights that are substantial changes from the current occupational license ordinance versus the new ordinance that's being proposed. So this is a complete repeal of the current ordinance and replacement. Definitions section, no major changes there. We have removed quite a bit of the language in the current ordinance that had to do with what a business needs to include on their application and how that process works, because we rely on Kenton County Business Services Department. They establish those applications in the forms. So we're removing all of that language from our ordinance. We are adding some clarification This is on page 3 under the requirements, adding some clarification as to when a business would be required to have a separate ordinance when there are separate business entities, for example, operating under one roof. That was not in the existing ordinance, and we've experienced that a couple of times where there are different business entities operating under one roof, so to speak. I am moving along to 3.4.3, review of application by the city administrator. This process is substantially the same, but changed slightly just to acknowledge that we are receiving the application information from Canton County Business Services, and then City Administrator Kramer then reviews that and determines if there's anything on that list that should be denied, and he has an opportunity to do that based on the criteria that's established here in the ordinance. The approval of the application is substantially the same. Conditional approval of the application, there's quite a bit of new language here. What we tried to do was allow for the city administrator to use a conditional approval of a business license as a way to reinstate a business that has either gone into default on their tax payments, or if they have had a condition such as a criminal nuisance or code violations on their property, then the city administrator can give them a conditional application for a certain period of time and apply conditions that need to be met and maintained to that business to keep that business license instated, so to speak. The disapproval of the application, that is substantially the same. And then the occupational license revocation and suspension, this section is really kind of the meat of where the changes are. This provides criteria for how the city administrator can revoke or suspend a business license. And one of the most important criteria here is that if there are any conditions that become known that had we have known about them at the time of the application being approved, then that business can be revoked of their license. So those are any things like code violations, any legal issues, building code violations, those types of offenses. So in that case, the license can be revoked. And then the next section is a procedure of how the business becomes notified that their license could be revoked or suspended. So in this section, it lays out a process that we've worked on with a couple of businesses in the city. So this section really lays out how we've been approaching that. Essentially, the city administrator will issue a letter letting the business know that their license is at risk of being suspended or revoked. It gives the business 14 days then to contact the city and come up with a process to remedy those conditions that exist and work through how they can remedy that. At that time, the city administrator can then give them time to address those remedies, give them a conditional license as they work through that, or if the business fails to contact the city administrator or doesn't provide any satisfactory remedies, then their license can be revoked at that time. So that section spells out how that process would work. The appeals of the decision of the city administrator, there's no change there. That will continue to go to the mayor for an appeals process. The business taxation section remains the same. That just spells out the amount of taxation that's been established previously by ordinance. Penalties and interest is a new section, and this is based on a KRS and also the current process that Kenton County Business Services uses. If someone falls behind in their quarterly payments or annual payments, they can apply a penalty and interest to that. And then under civil penalties, the penalty amounts remain the same, but we've clarified that the business can be cited for a violation of each day of that, each day within which that violation exists can constitute a separate violation. And I believe that sums up the substantial changes. Did I miss anything, Jack?
No, I just want to comment that most of this has been created due to specific issues that I think the city's faced over the last 2 to 3 years. Mr. Kramer and Ms. Randall have done a phenomenal job of putting this together, literally with a blank slate. And while you never want to target any ordinances or legislation, because of specific businesses or incidents, we have used issues that have come up in the city and some of the weaknesses of a prior ordinance to help build this and allow a little bit more robust process that gives a little more discretion to Mr. Kramer and Ms. Randall in renewing people's business licenses that are continual problem businesses. But in the same token, I think providing better due process for people who are within the grips of the government, because I think both are critical. I think you've got to give the executive branch the tools to deal with problem businesses, but then you've got to allow those businesses adequate due process that will survive legal challenge. And I think this ordinance does that. And again, I just want to stress with council that Ms. Randall and Mr. Kramer have put a lot of time and effort into this. And a lot of the problems that we have seen in Erlanger over the last 2 to 3 years regarding businesses, this would have helped solve some of those problems in a little better manner for probably the business and the city. So,
Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. I guess the first one, is this, since we're making this wholesale change to this piece, is this the time to consider putting a FICA cap on our employees' payroll tax as we see, across some other cities throughout Kenton County and inclusive of Kenton County themselves?
I would think we would want to have Director Kramer evaluate that and what impact that could potentially have on the budget.
Are we pressed to make these changes immediately, or do we have time, so we have time to come back and evaluate that impact?
yeah, absolutely. This has been worked on for at least 12 to 18 months, so another month or 2 is not going to matter. There's nothing pressing on this.
Yeah, my second question was, and I was trying to scroll through the existing code to find it, but is it in this ordinance where we restrict a portion of that payroll tax to the capital improvement fund? And if so, does that need to be re-added back into this?
Certainly not the intent of this ordinance to change that. I don't believe that is in section 110, but I will make sure of that. I think that's in a different section of ordinances that
Okay.
specifically, I think historically council dealt with that issue in a separate ordinance, but we'll confirm that.
Yeah, I appreciate what you had said there, Mr. Gatlin, too, because that was one of the things I was thinking. I wanted to make sure we weren't making these changes to an ordinance because of 1 or 2 businesses or problematic businesses, and forcing these changes on everybody, on 400 businesses because of 2. But, as you said, this has been the compilation of improvements over the course of many years and many different issues. So thank you for that input.
Okay, so we'll take a look at the numbers that you're requesting, Gary. So we won't put anything on the council meeting for this piece of legislation. We'll hold off and have another conversation at the next caucus, okay? All right, any other questions on that? Okay, we'll move on to our last item on the agenda, our home consortium. You've been so patient. We have Covington Mayor Joe Meyer in the audience tonight. He came to me with a request, an opportunity, and we've done some analysis on our part. I want to thank your team, your Assistant City Manager, Joy, and your Community Development Manager, Jeremy. They've done a wonderful job working with Emmy to get all the information, so thank them for us. So if you'd like to explain a little bit about the Home Consortium and your experience.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm Joe Meyer from Covington, and I appreciate the opportunity, the fact that you all have invited me to here to talk about the home program and to encourage you all to participate in it. What I'm going to do is talk about the Home Buyer Assistance Program. I'll talk about the consortium. I'll talk about where the money's going to come from. I'm going to talk about what it means to you, and I'll talk about the timeline. If y'all have any questions in any of it, feel free to interrupt me with your questions. First, let me say flat out that I do encourage you to join the Home Consortium so you can help Erlanger residents become homeowners at no cost to you or to your city government. Let me talk about the Home Buyer Assistance Program itself. This is a program through which we offer up to $7,500 to prospective homeowners to cover their down payment and the customary settlement charges that people have to pay when they buy a house. The eligible applicants for this program are people who have a gross annual income of at least 80% below the area median income. What's that number mean in real dollars? For a single person, people with a salary or with an income of less than $47,850 are eligible to participate in the program. And if there's a family of four involved in the home purchase, the income level is $68,300 or less. So, you know, it's not, people can have pretty good incomes and still be eligible to participate in this program. As part of their participation in the program, the borrowers have to participate in a home buyer counseling program so that they learn about the pitfalls of home ownership. We all grew up saying home ownership is a dream. Now that we are homeowners, we know that it's not such a dream. We've got a lot of obligations that go with it, and so this program ensures that people who are getting into the waters of home ownership understand what they're getting into. What kind of property can they buy? A one or two family home, owner-occupied or vacant. It has to be below the purchase limit, which right now is $170,000 for people in Kenton County. So if you're a single person with an income of $47,850 or less, this program can help you buy a house that's worth up to $170,000. This is a forgivable loan program. So the $7,500 is people sign to borrow the money for a term of 5 years at 0% interest with no monthly payments. Then if the homeowner lives in the house for 5 years, the loan is completely forgiven. They don't owe anything back. It's go on and have a good life. If they sell the property before 5 years, then at closing, they repay the $7,500 in its entirety, and it's used to help some other homeowner. The reason for that is that we want to encourage people to become stable members of the community. So you participate in the program, stay in your house 5 years, you get to keep the $7,500. Covington has used this to help at least 50 families a year for the past 8 years become homeowners. So we have helped several hundred people buy homes throughout our city. It is not a small and insignificant program. Next, what is the Home Consortium? The Home Consortium is made up of the cities of Covington, Newport, Bellevue, Dayton, and Ludlow. Covington is an entitlement city under the home program. Covington gets money directly from the federal government to cover the cost of this program. Back in 2007, the river cities combined together to set up the consortium because that qualified the consortium for money to come directly from the federal government to the consortium. that otherwise our region would not get. So the Home Consortium Board is made up of the mayors or their designees of each of the member cities, and the board establishes the policies, procedures, the funding allocation, and controls all of the activities of the money that comes into the consortium. Because Covington is a entitlement city and the money comes directly to us, we also provide the administrative support to the consortium, where we make sure that all the federal rules are followed. We handled all the administrative costs, including the review of all the applications and all the paperwork associated with the loans at zero cost to the cities that are involved in it. And the home funds can be used for this home ownership program, or if you work with an organization like HONK, Home Ownership Northern Kentucky, the money can be used to support HONK's activities too. So that's the board, that's our consortium. The next issue is, where's this money come from? HOME is the largest federal block grant to state and local governments, and it's designed exclusively to increase home ownership and to increase the supply of affordable housing. It's allocated, the federal money is allocated to the consortium based on a federal formula that includes population, poverty, and other criteria that are over my head. The simple fact is this: if Erlanger joins our consortium, the consortium will receive more federal money than it does today. Now, the funds for the consortium members are not set aside by city. Instead, all of the funds, all of the consortium funds are available to all of the cities, and we let the market determine where the funding actually goes. So in some years, a city gets more than their share, and in other years, they get less. We have been following this rule since 2007 and have had no practical problems with it. So what does this program mean for Erlanger? It won't cost you anything, no money out of your pocket, doesn't cost you any staff time. What we expect you to do is to promote the program, and in our experience, the referrals of applicants come from realtors and lenders. So work with your real estate agents, work with your lenders. They're the ones who take advantage and help their clients take advantage of this program. Covington does all of the administrative work at no cost to you, and you get to help your residents become homeowners. Really straightforward. If you all decide to go forward with this, the question then becomes, what's the timeline that we're working with? If you all indicate to us that you are interested in proceeding, then in March, our consortium board would get together to approve adding Erlanger as a member of the consortium. And then in April or May, you would have to pass an authorizing resolution authorizing Erlanger to join the consortium. And then the Erlanger and Covington mayors would have to sign an interlocal cooperation agreement to effect that. And then before the 30th of June, Covington would submit the appropriate paperwork to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then when they get around to approving it, you all would be a full member, and you and your people would be eligible to participate in this program. So like I said, from our perspective and our experience, it has been a wonderful tool to help our people, especially our young people who don't have a lot of money saved up, to become homeowners by giving them the down payment assistance that they need to buy a home. It's win-win. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you all might have.
Ms. Jasper Lucas.
Thank you. A few questions. How many, you said you do about 50 families a year for the last 8 years. How many have stayed, and you talked about the 5-year goal to stay in the house for 5 years. How many of those families have stayed in that house for 5 years?
The overwhelming majority of them. I can't give you an exact number on that. I do know that on occasion, people have reasons that they
Right,
have to move or
obviously.
whatever.
Right.
So the number of folks who have come back in less than 5 years is very small.
Okay. What's the average home price in Covington? I know you mentioned the 170,000 or less. What would you say the average home price, or do you know the statistic of what the average home price is? And I know the last year's probably skewed that quite a bit because home prices have jumped up. But just curious as to kind of what price point, typically is, what house price point typically is being purchased with this.
The $170,000 maximum applies to Covington too. And the answer to your question, what's it cost, depends on what neighborhood it's in. So if you get into South Covington, our median value there is $200,000. So, we're pretty close. If it's Seminary Square or Licking Riverside, forget it. The highest prices are way too high. But if you go into Latonia, the median household income, the median sale price in the last quarter of last year was about $130,000. So in Pieselberg, it was $149,000 last quarter. On the east side of Covington, it could be as high as $170,000 median. So really, it all depends on the neighborhood, and there's a wide range of housing. But you want to get people into housing that is in relatively good condition. You don't want to sell them a house that's going to cost a lot of money to rehabilitate or fix up. So the quality of the housing tends to drive up the price.
That leads me to another question. Is there any kind of home inspection that takes place to kind of make sure that they're not getting a money pit?
Yes, ma'am. It is required that the property meet all of the building codes and housing standards. So there is an inspection to guarantee that the property is qualified and eligible.
With the increase in home prices in the area, is that 170,000 figure going to be reevaluated? Or I'm just looking at, what home prices have done in general in Northern Kentucky in the past year. And I'm just curious if that would be reevaluated.
That property is set based on a review of overall housing cost in the county in this case. So in my other experiences, that price is probably evaluated on an annual basis and adjusted.
If I can jump in just really quick. If I can jump in real quick, I have two pieces of information that you might be interested in. The 2019 and the 2020, there's a heat map of the distribution of funds that crosses all the river cities. So I can send that out so you can see like where it actually is having the most impact. It's quite interesting. It's pretty spread across all of Covington.
Right.
You answered how do people know about it. The only other question I had was, are people going to be able to work with a preferred mortgage company and get a good interest rate on their mortgage? I mean, I know that's hard to know, but I guess thinking about, who might be taking advantage of this, depending on their circumstances. If they're young and they've never had any debt, they probably don't have a great credit score. I worry about somebody getting into a house and paying a high interest rate, whereas if they'd waited a couple of years, I don't know, that's just my own personal philosophy on some things. But I just wouldn't want us to be encouraging people to buy a house too soon. And I guess that's where my question's coming from. Are they still going to be able to get a good interest rate on their mortgage? And I know that's probably hard to answer.
Well, the consortium does not control the lenders. So the applicants go and deal with their own real estate agent, their own lenders, and then are bought to participate in the program. So I don't have a good answer to your question. There's not a good answer to your question because we don't control that. We do expect market rates. We do expect their advisors, their family members, their real estate agents and others to help them make sure that the deal is good for them too.
That would
And
probably
like
be
I
more of a
said,
question for a lender too, I guess.
Well said. But remember, we do require, the federal law requires, they go through a home ownership program that would help them understand the mortgage financing as well as the maintenance, the insurance cost, the taxes, and the other costs and investments that have to be made to support home ownership.
Ms. Reckers?
The 170 is probably geared more toward someone's lendability based on their income. If you are looking at national averages, it would make sense that it would have to cap somewhere so that their actual payments would be affordable in some capacity to not set them up for failure. So I think that is likely where that logic is. This is very similar to, sounds like kind of some of the USDA loans that would be done in more rural areas, but this just seems like it's more of a, like a redevelopment of, or not redevelopment, but re-energizing homeownership for lower income.
Well, one of the greatest challenges, and I'm speaking from my own life's experience, was accumulating the money to make the down payment and get the cost that go with purchasing a home. So this helps people cross that hurdle.
So what other cities are being, is this being discussed with? Is it just Erlanger?
Well, we talked to, of course, our river cities are involved. Mayor Fetty and I have had a conversation about this. I also talked to independents to see if they might be interested in it. Again, I'll go back to 2007 before my time. Covington got and gets grants directly from the federal government for this home ownership program that we could continue just to do on our own just fine. But because we helped organize the consortium, we brought other money in to help other communities here in Northern Kentucky do a similar thing, to help their people become homeowners in their communities without any cost to any of us, because we're accessing federal government. We viewed this as an opportunity to help Erlanger, help your people become homeowners at no cost to any of us.
So could Erlanger become its own consortium, an own entitlement city through this process?
You're not big enough to do that. Covington is one of 10 entitlement cities throughout the state. And we're an entitlement city only because at one time we had in excess of 50,000 population.
I just had one other question. Is this stackable with other first-time homebuyer grants?
Could you say that again, Gary?
Is this stackable with other first-time homebuyer grants? Or is this independent or in replace of? Do we know?
If people get other money to help them buy a home, I think it would be stackable. Like if you want to give your kids some extra money, you can give them money and help them get this loan too.
So we wouldn't know, oh, I'm so sorry. If we were to join this, would we have any indication as to what that sum would look like that would be available to Erlanger specific residents? So it's great that that 50 home buyers were made home buyers in Covington last year through this program. But what does the other, I know she's got a heat map, but I'm just curious as to what that looks like for our 19,000 people that there's a need for.
That's a fair question. I do not have off the top of my head the total budget for the consortium outside Covington. Okay? But keep this in mind. We do not say, Dayton, here's your share, Newport, here's your share, Erlanger, here's your share. We put all of it into one pot. And then those decisions are made collectively by the board. And a lot of it is a function of the way the market is operating. So let's say we get an extra $50,000 or $60,000 because Erlanger joins us. Well, it's not like you get 7 houses guaranteed every year. In some years you may get 2 or 3 or 4, depending on what your demand is here. In other years you may get 12 or 15 or 20, again, depending on the demand. We've proven over the past, since 2007, 14 years, that different communities have different needs at different times. And so by putting it all in a pot, that's governed by the board, made up of the mayors of each of the cities, we've wound up with some pretty fair allocations.
Is there a possibility that we enter the consortium and then no money would be allocated to Erlanger?
No.
I wanted
No,
to.
I mean, if you've got demand for it,
So there could be an instance where we wouldn't potentially have any money available to our residents.
The only instance would be if we don't advertise it properly and people don't know that it's an option.
Yeah.
And nobody applies. That's the only real possibility.
Right.
But that's up to us to make sure that we're getting the word out and talking to the realtors and talking to those individuals that could potentially use this.
We would love to have a situation where there's more demand than we have funds available. No, we're helping more people become homeowners. And I think, well, at least from my experience, home ownership is the root of our community's success. We want people living in our neighborhoods who own their house because they are invested. And they do all the things that we expect people to do. They shovel the snow. They keep their property clean. They watch out for their neighbors.
Mr. Dunn?
What's the default rate on these loans? The default rate generally, over time, have you seen a lot of defaults? Are there a lot of foreclosures going on as a result of this program?
None of that has been brought to my attention. I'm sure there have been defaults. It's just in the normal course of business, but none of those have been brought to my attention, and I could ask and find out the answer to that question for you.
Okay, so I'm assuming that this might be something we're interested in. And I'm really wanting to hit this March deadline. Because I know if we don't hit the deadline, then we'd have to wait for a full year. Is that right?
Right.
So, I mean, if this is something that we'd like to move on, I'd like to be able to put some legislation on the agenda for February? Or is it just, like, when do you need the resolution?
Well, at this stage, we want you to give us an indication that you want to participate. And if you say yes, informally is fine, that you want to participate, then we will go to the consortium board and ask the board to vote to allow Erlanger to become part of the consortium. Once that action is taken, then in April or May, we would ask the city to adopt an authorizing resolution. We need to have that done before June.
So Jack, do you think we need just like a straw poll tonight in order to give Mayor Meyer the go-ahead?
I mean, it sounds like that's all Mayor Meyer needs at this point, would be a
Okay.
straw
Sure.
poll to make sure that we can move forward. With the idea, I'm presuming there's an interlocal agreement that would be a part of our resolution.
Right. At this stage, it's give us an okay, a simple motion and vote or whatever, and then the consortium will approve it. Then we have the paperwork, the same paperwork that all the other cities have signed, that we'll share with you, and you all adopt the appropriate order adopting that.
Okay, Sherry, if you wouldn't mind, do you have the ability to do a roll call vote, just a straw poll? What we would be voting on is if you are willing to move forward in this process, say aye. Please.
Mayor, do we need to make a motion and just vote?
For just a straw poll? Jack?
I mean, I think it's the comfort of Mayor Meyer. I mean, I would just remind council that this is a caucus meeting, and we generally don't take formal action at caucus meetings. That being said, I don't really perceive tonight as any formal action taken. I think I think Mayor Meyer just wants an understanding from council that if he's going to go forward with the due diligence of getting Erlanger put on as a potential board, that when this comes back to us with a resolution in interlocal, it's not dead on arrival. Is that fair?
Correct.
So I guess maybe I'll ask the question of my colleagues here, is there any objection? I mean, I don't see a downside here at all, but I'm not seeing anybody objecting, so.
Does that satisfy you, Mayor Meyer?
You got the thumbs up. Thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for waiting for us to get to this point, too. I mean, he's been very patient this evening. Thank you so much.
But you also meet weekly? You meet weekly?
And there's a smaller number of you. All right. Do I entertain a motion that we adjourn? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sycamore, the deterrents are down again, another semi on Sycamore, so just, if we could take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. All right. Ms. Nicely? Okay, make a motion that we adjourn. Mrs. Kyle, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Have a good evening.